We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And everybody enjoy this final week with Tom for 1 week. He'll be gone next week, but he'll be back the week after.
I will.
So it's not a long break.
Probably.
Ah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably.
All right.
I had some friends who called me. Mm-hmm. They were in Portland, Seattle, one of those places. Uh-huh. High vaccination rates. These people have been vaccinated for a long time. They got vaccinated as soon as they could, whenever it was available. In fact, he got vaccinated a little bit sooner. He kind of got on a list somehow and got vaccinated a little bit sooner than I did, at least.
All right.
And he called me, said, well, we were supposed to fly home today, but we can't because we were at my cousin's or uncle's or somebody's house, and a 8-year-old child wasn't feeling well. And 2 days later, we got a call and said, hey, they tested positive. I mean, I don't know which variant it was, but they tested positive. But they're all vaccinated, so we took a test, and my wife is sick. She's got it.
Oh.
So we can't get on the plane.
Right.
I'm like, you're like literally the other side of the other corner of the country. So they started driving home. The three of them. It was them and the.
So they were visiting in Florida and were trying to get back home to the West Coast.
No, he lives here and he was over there.
They were visiting the West Coast and they were trying to get back home. Okay.
He's trying to get back home.
Gotcha.
So they just started driving, and now they're all wearing masks. They're all she's sitting in the back of the minivan and everything else. And he called me yesterday. Yeah, I got it too now. Now she's driving. Wow. She's feeling better because they're vaccinated, so the symptoms are not that bad. Right. It only lasts for a couple of days, and then she's fine. So she's now driving, and he's 3,100 miles.
Yeah,
almost 3,200 miles they drove in like 3 days.
Yeah.
I think they slept in the car. I don't think they got out because
I know the feeling of driving many miles in a short amount of time. You just you just go.
It's like a little COVID van just coming along. Yeah. I was like, well, at least you're not bringing anything here that we don't already have here because it's Florida.
Right.
The numbers are like through the roof. So, so we're going on a vacation next week. Good for us. And,
yeah. So you're like, it might not be allowed to come back on the plane. That's what you're getting at.
No, we're driving. We're not going that
far.
far.
Driving, okay.
Yeah, we're driving. Okay. In fact, we're even taking 2 cars because we can't fit everything in one. Yeah, so it's just we're driving. There's no way I'm getting on the plane. But that's just now that has completely thrown my wife for a loop. She was feeling pretty confident and kind of pushing me to like relax our own personal COVID restrictions in this house, and she went into serious lockdown mode. Like no one's allowed to leave. My kids are like, "Can I see my no?"
Right?
Can I go? No. Stay inside. Don't even breathe my air.
Right.
So. Fun times. All right, so this is AVRant Podcast, answers your home theater AV questions. Get your questions answered. You email us by question@avrant.com, Facebook.avrant.com, leave us a comment, whatever. Facebook.com/AVRant Podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. Rob's direct email is rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter's @avrant_Tom. Signed up for Peacock.
Oh, okay.
So I can see the stupid Olympics.
Yes.
And I can't get the verification email to come through so I can watch stuff live. And I keep emailing them, and they keep saying, we resent it. I'm like, yeah, it's not coming through. Can you fix it? They can't fix it. Anyways,
not like it should have been a priority.
And that service, I'll be honest with you, that service sucks.
Okay.
It's complete garbage.
we were watching the skateboarding replay last night. We were counting because you could see something happen and hear it happen.
Okay.
So we were counting the audio delay that was embedded within the signal.
Nice.
It was almost 5 seconds.
Awesome.
5 seconds of delay.
Perfect.
Like you would
just what you want.
Just what you want. So, all right. Let's see here. We'll do that. Let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you support the podcast in some way. If you're at Peacock, you can support us by sending a verification email. It's Tom at AVRant. It works. I get emails all the time. I verified it myself. I did everything. I went to all the spam filters. I went through everything. It's not there. You can support us by going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation, which is what Clint did. So thank you very much, Clint.
Yes, Clint, thank you very much for the PayPal donation. Really appreciate that financial support.
We also have 127 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you sign up to become a monthly subscriber to our podcast. Every month, I'll take some money from you and give it to us. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a sound that just happened. So I don't know what that was. So then we want to thank Martin from Ireland and Bertrand for doing that. So thank you very much, Martin and Bertrand, before becoming patrons, as well as our 125 additional patrons. Thank you very much.
That is the math. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. So thanks very much to our 127 patrons over there, Martin and Bertrand. Thank you very much for being two of them.
So if you can't support us financially, we completely understand. Just tell us what you did and we'll mention it here. Andrew generously offered to, let's use the words, assist Rob in finding a way to watch the new Masters of the Universe Revelation series on Netflix since Rob canceled the subscription in protest of their price hikes. So
yes.
I think we can all read between the lines there. That's not super.
We are not saying anything. I am not getting Andrew in any trouble. I am saying he is assisting me in figuring out a way to watch that show on Netflix, and I appreciate it very much, Andrew. Thank you.
All right. We also, Jack, Bertrand, and Clint sent me some photos to use on AV Gadgets with permission to use those photos. I haven't looked at them yet, but I saw them come through, so thank you, Jack.
Many
Bertrand,
of them
and
are
Clint.
in some kind of zipped format, so you will be extracting the photos, but Jack and Bertrand and Clint, thank you very much for giving Tom permission to use your photographs on avgadgets.com.
We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during this ongoing pandemic, including from Jason from Melbourne, who asks, how do I like the mee goreng recipe he sent me, which is from his grandfather, and it is excellent.
Great.
Excellent recipe. I haven't made it recently, but every time I make it, I'm like, I should make this more. It is so good. So, and he also says this for me to stay safe while cycling, which is, I was supposed to cycle this morning, but I didn't because I woke up and it was lightning and thunder. And I was like, it'll probably go away by the time it's time for me to cycle, but I'm just taking this as a sign that I should go back to sleep. So, Jack, and so there was Jason, and then there's Jack. There's Martin, who says we convinced him to get 2 SVS SB1000 Pro subs rather than mixing a used ported sub with a single SB1000 Pro. Don't remember, but I'm sure we did that. Bertrand, who also talked us up on Facebook and told people we've been a big help with this home theater build. And, of course, Clint, who sent me photos and everything else. So we've got Jason, Jack, Martin, Bertrand, and Clint. So thank you very much for the notes of gratitude.
That's right. I'll say the names one more time. Jason, Jack, Martin, Bertrand, and Clint. Thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement are very much appreciated. And thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right, so it's in the news now. We've got this exciting time for AV receivers. So we've got some AV receiver news. The 2021 Aventage models from Yamaha are showing up for pre-order with expected ship dates in August. They still require a firmware update to allow 4K 120 and VRR support, which is just kind of weird that they can't just firmware it before it leaves when it hasn't even shipped yet. Kind of weird. That's what happens when you let Emotiva handle the firmware.
They didn't, but this is the info we have. That's what it says. Via future firmware update.
Future.
Yep.
Future. You know, that thing that never happens because it's always out there. I think it'll happen. I mean, I'm sure. I have faith that Yamaha will push something through, but, you know.
Yeah.
Kind of weird. Anyways, these shouldn't need an HDMI board replacement like the 2020 model, so that's good. The RX A4A is $1,300 and tops out at 7 speakers. The A6A is $2,200 with 9 amps built in and 11 speaker processing. And the A8A is a whopping $3,000 and has 11 amps built in. And then if you're not on board with the Yamaha, we've got the Onkyo 2021 models are showing up for pre-order in Canada, not here. Can't really find them here. And the U.S. Walmart has product pages, Rob says.
Yes.
Whatever. They're the first receivers with confirmed working support for HDMI 2.1 on more than one input without needing a future firmware update, or so they say. So now that Onkyo product pages are going up, there are some interesting details. If you want a full set of pre-outs, you've got to go all the way up to the $1,400 TXR Z50. It's got 9 amps built in, but can process 11 speakers. They're saying they'll ship in October. The $1,100 TX-NR7... I want to say 7100 because of the way the other one is, but that's not it. NR7100 is the least expensive model with Dirac on board for its room correction. It does come with a cheap disc mic. You can use the Dirac app on your phone or tablet for setup. You also have the option of using your own measure mic and Dirac's computer software. So an interesting move towards being more mass market there, because I guess because of the app. I guess whatever.
Yeah, and coming with a microphone, but not the higher end like UMic 1 type. It's pretty much still looks like the cheap disc mic that they were using with EQ, but now Dirac is on board, and you use an app to do the setup instead of having to be a computer.
It's the 7100 doesn't have any pre-outs, and it tops out at 9 speakers, so that's a bit unexpected for $1,100, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit unusual. It's been a while since we've seen a receiver model that has 9 amplifiers built in, but doesn't have the ability to process 11 speakers if you were to add an external 2-channel amp. I mean, that's what the RZ50 does, so that's expected and has the full set of pre-outs. But yeah, the 7100, no pre-outs on the back of that thing other than the subwoofer outputs, and 9 internal amplifiers, and that's where it tops out. So it is a 9-channel receiver.
There you go. If you manage to get that PS5 before July 22nd, 2022, you'll get 6 months of Apple TV Plus for free, even if you're already an Apple TV Plus subscriber. Let's tack it on there.
Yep.
Apple recently reduced the free trial from 1 year down to 3 months when you buy an Apple product, so this is a better deal if you can find a PS5, which is, of course, problematic.
You've got about a year.
There's only one other catch. You have to redeem the 6-month offer via the PS5 itself, and it will start charging you month to month if you don't manually cancel. So, that's kind of the way those things work. And then from Carl, if you are a Fandango Now user, which I forgot existed until I read these words right there.
That's kind of why I put it in there.
Expect to see a message the next time you log in to warn you that Fandango Now is now going away, but your account and all of your content will be moved over to Vudu. Fandango bought Vudu from Walmart back in April 2020, and they have apparently decided to keep Vudu as their streaming video service. So now all Fandango Now, it's too many nows. So all Fandango Now customers will be rolled into that. So it's all Vudu. It's just going to be
all going to be Vudu.
Vudu all the way down.
See how long Vudu lasts. That was sort of the last place, other than iTunes, to continue with your, having redeemed your digital codes. Everything is movies anywhere now in the States, so that's really what you want to get on board with. In Canada, we've kind of been hosed as far as anything that used to be ultraviolet. So that's about the end of that. Tom's face is getting stuck in some wonderful expressions because Skype keeps freezing.
My internet has been really slow today. I thought it was because my son was streaming something because he's in a virtual camp this week.
Yes. What an expression that Tom is making. Which is this way that I'm pointing?
I can't see it. Where is it? I can't even see it. It won't even open Skype for me.
Lovely.
All right. Some comments there, Nathan. I guess one comment. Nathan wanted to make a recommendation for Justin from last week, who was looking for high output in-wall or on-wall speakers for his brother. Nathan thinks JBL Synthesis or Revel's upper tier in-wall models would be a good way to go. Those are expensive.
They are very expensive. I certainly agree. I do think they would be excellent speakers. No argument there. The price, though, even when Justin was saying that his brother has a very generous budget to work with, even with a very generous budget, you could very easily exceed it with that type of speakers. So
we switched cameras. I haven't done that in a while.
Yep.
That was exciting. I started wrapping the camera cable around one of my other USB ones, and that seems to have stopped that camera switching until just now. Whatever. Rob, not you. This is a question from Rob. So Rob has a comment and a follow-up to start before we get to his questions. First, he had LASIK eye surgery to correct his vision about 17 years ago. Unfortunately, he has the side effect where he sees halos of light around small, bright objects. I didn't know that was a side effect, but
it can be.
Okay.
It can be.
It's a hassle for driving at night, but it also means that even though he has an LG OLED, he still sees blooming. So I think I don't know that we can do anything about that in the settings, but okay.
No, that is not the TV's fault.
For him, there isn't much difference between his OLED and his TCL 6 series TV, but the haloing effect is worse when his pupils are dilated, so he keeps a biased light on behind his TV at all times. It helps a bit, but he ultimately wishes he hadn't had the LASIK procedure, so just something to be aware for any listeners who might be considering it. I know Clint had it and loved it, so I mean, I don't...
Yeah, my
you gotta think there are side effects and drawbacks, and you have to read the fine print and all that.
There absolutely can be. Yeah, the LASIK version of laser eye surgery is where they sort of slice a little flap off the front, then do the correction, and then put the flap back down. And for some people, when that flap comes back down, it doesn't seat perfectly, it doesn't heal perfectly, and they can end up with sometimes some blurring, sometimes some double vision, sometimes some haloing. So unfortunately, Rob had that side effect from his version. My uncle had LASIK eye surgery and didn't have any side effects. There is the alternative laser eye surgery. They go under different brand names depending on who's doing it, but where it's ablation, where they actually just use the laser to remove all layers of the eye and then just allow it to grow back and heal, which generally you don't get the side effects of any of the double vision or the haloing or that, but sometimes, if you get a little bit of tiny scar tissue or something like that comes in there, you can have partially obstructed vision and that too with that. So nothing is completely free. Any surgery, literally any surgery, can potentially have a negative side effect. So, it is something to keep in mind. It depends on, how stable your vision is, how bad your vision is, and all that. Something to keep in mind. But I'm sorry to hear about that, Rob. I have no idea what can be done about that until maybe some future surgery can be used to protect, fix it. Yeah.
Next up, the last time he wrote us was when he was asking if there's a way to apply a negative audio delay since his Xbox Series X video was preceding the audio. Video was preceding the audio. Well, if the video is preceding... Oh, no, you're right.
Yeah, slowing down the audio ain't going to help.
I always have to sit there and think about that for a second. Something.
Because pretty much every AV receiver has the ability to delay the audio.
Right.
But if the audio is already trailing the video, you don't want to delay it more. That's not going to help. So, he wanted a negative audio delay.
We said that part of the problem was that his Marantz receiver doesn't actually have eARC. He actually has a Marantz SR6011, not the 6010 as he wrote last time, but that makes no difference since the 6011 doesn't have eARC either, just regular HMR ARC. We were correct on 2 suggestions. Okay, are these them?
Yes, these are the 2 suggestions.
Okay. He continued to have audio sync issues and too much delay no matter what he did until he set his Xbox to output Dolby Digital Bitstream rather than Atmos. It seems our suspicions were correct. The Xbox would output Atmos Bitstream with it plugged directly into his LG OLED because the TV itself could decode Atmos, but when the TV was converting that into something it could send over regular ARC, and that was creating a delay. So setting up the Xbox Series X to output Dolby Digital works best. So basically, the video and the audio were arriving at the TV at the same time. And then the TV was having to process the audio from Atmos down to Dolby Digital so it could send it out of ARC. And that was delaying the audio. Basically.
That's right. Yeah. So it was, that is something that, because he thought he had eARC originally. He thought he had eARC because his AV receiver has eARC and people talk about eARC, and he was able to set his Xbox to Atmos, and he's like, well, why would it even work if it didn't? If this doesn't work, why am I hearing something? Why is the audio seemingly working? I must have eARC, but unfortunately, no. It's the situation where the TV was acting as the decoder and then having to re-encode it to send it out of regular ARC to his slightly older AV receiver, and all of that was enough to cause an audio delay.
So the other thing is using an optical audio connection from his OLED to his Marantz lets him set a negative number for the audio delay, so he can fix the audio sync and delay issues that way as well. I honestly feel like any time that you can not, as soon as you start adjusting the audio delay in any way, shape, or form, I think my experience is like you fixed it, but then the minute that you switch to a different input or different something, it's unfixed again.
Potentially,
or maybe you broke it in a different way. Like I had apps in particular. I remember this hasn't been a problem in a long time, but I remember I had apps that had audio delay issues when I'm at probably my Xbox 360 or whatever, and I would fix it for that. And then the minute I switched to a different app, then I'd have to go back and unfix it. So.
But if the only device he's using where the audio is going from source to television and then from television to receiver, if that's the only one that's doing that, and all of his other audio sources are plugged into the receiver first, and then feeding it, then that should be okay, because essentially that negative audio delay that he's applying, that only is coming from the television. That's only when the television is the audio source. So I think in his setup, he's all right. And happily, our suggestions essentially worked out.
Right. His questions here. Using the Dolby Surround Upmixer in his Marantz makes all the audio coming from his Xbox sound pretty good, but he can't help but feel like he's missing out. Is there some kind of HDMI splitter that will let him send the 4K 120 video with VRR from his Xbox to his OLED while sending the full quality audio to his Marantz? Or does he have to look into getting a new AV receiver? The Denon X3700H would work, right? Well, I mean, those HG Fury things will do this.
Well, but no, they're still back on HDMI 2.0.
Oh, you're right. I forgot.
We
They haven't updated yet.
Yeah, we don't have HDMI 2.1 splitters yet. I'm sure they will come at some point, but we don't have them yet.
Honestly, in this case, it's like you're going to end up paying nearly as much by the time one of these things comes out. You're going to end up paying nearly as much for the HG Fury thing so that you can keep your old receiver, as you're going to pay like 2/3 of what you would pay for a receiver from Accessories for Less or something like that. I mean,
and that's when it arrives, which isn't right now. You can't go out and buy an HD Fury device or an HDMI splitter yet that does HDMI 2.1. They just don't exist yet. So, you could buy a new AV receiver. Directly answering, yes, the Denon X3700H would work after you purchase it and then contact Denon and get the SPK618 little adapter box thingy, which you have to have you have to have a serial number first, so you do have to make the purchase first and then contact them. So that's fun. Or you could wait for one of those new Yamaha or Onkyo models, although with the Yamaha, you'd then have to wait for the firmware update that they've promised, but they promised it back in 2020 as well, and that still never happened, and you have to send it in for a board replacement. So Onkyo is probably the safest one once those arrive, because those aren't out yet either.
Those are not, October?
So all of your answers are basically wait. I really have to think that like Denon and Marantz are going to make at least an announcement at some point in the not too distant future.
I'm surprised.
I'm not super shocked, because I have a suspicion that whatever HDMI solution they did have, like they're waiting on parts, or maybe they were going to continue with the same parts they were using from 2020 and then realized nobody's happy about just one HDMI 2.1 input and they really, really need to change that, and it's better to just wait rather than put out an entire new model year. So, but I just, it feels like something should be getting announced by Denon and Marantz fairly soon.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So he's got a 7.2.4 configuration running off his Marantz the 6011. So that means he needs at least 2 channels of external amplification. He decided to use 2 channels on his Dayton MA1240A distribution amp, which has 12 channels total, 40 watts each. And he's using those 2 channels to power his top rear speakers, which makes sense. The trim levels that Odyssey set for all of his other speakers are basically all within the range of -4 to +1, but the top rear speakers were boosted to +12. Mm-hmm. Does that indicate that the Dayton amp is underpowering his top rear, so he just bust out his old Denon receiver to use as an amp for his top rears? If it's boosted +12, it means that there is something going on here. I'm trying to look at this.
If that isn't fully maxed out, then that's pretty darn close to maxed out. But
I've never seen a Denon receiver that went above 12 or -12.
Yeah, we're having a look at the back of the Dayton distribution amp that he described, because it does have little potentiometers for each of the 12 channels, right at the top above each little mini Phoenix connector that it's got there. There are little potentiometers, which is a gain knob. It's a gain knob on the back of the Dayton for each individual channel. So if the little gain knobs for the 2 channels that you're using to power your top rear speakers, if those are already maxed out, then it is sort of an indication that, seems...
I can't believe 40 watts per channel won't do what he needs, though.
Oh, it's not the watts per channel, it would be the gain. And that's why I strongly suspect that the little potentiometers are not maxed out.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that 40 watts is enough to give him the amount of power that he needs.
Oh, yeah, it's not the watts.
For top rears. Yeah. The only thing I would caution against is, I would turn those the volume knobs all the way up, and then go sit in your seat without playing anything and make sure you don't hear any noise.
Okay.
Because this could be a slightly noisier amp than what you're used to. You may have to back them off a little bit to make sure that you're not hearing any noise.
And we're talking about like
sit down.
Hiss coming from the tweeters. That's what we would expect to hear if the noise floor is very high. But I bet Rob's right. I can't even see those things. I see it says volume, but is that a knob or is it like a screw? Sometimes it's like a little screws. You put a little flathead screw into it, and it's a little pot that you can turn there. Yeah, you put a little flathead screw in there to turn it.
Okay. All right, Don. And if different analog interconnects and speaker wire don't make any significant difference to the signal or sound, why is it that one HDMI cable can pass 18 gigabits per second or 48 gigabits per second, but the other one can't? There seem to be some very real and demonstrable differences between HDMI cables, so why is that? And if HDMI cables can make a noticeable difference, why can't speaker wires? Speaker wires can make the exact same difference that you're talking about. Yeah. Cut one. just cut it. And that's essentially what's happening. When you don't have the bandwidth to get, when your cable is not manufactured with enough bandwidth or not tight enough tolerances so that it will send through the entire signal, that is what is happening with these cables, these HDMI cables that are not rated high enough. The signal is getting degraded before it can get to the other side. And that might be because of the distance. It might be because of the cable not being manufactured with, like I said, tight enough tolerances so that there's too many inconsistencies, or maybe there's little bits of breaks or something like that, or fraying within the wires, or the shielding isn't where it should be, or all these other things. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in HDMI cables are extremely complicated. And you can go to Blue Jean Cable's website and read about HDMI cables and how complicated they are. They are extremely complicated. And do they need to be? No. They are, because they wanted to put on HDCP and put content protection on them. That's why we're going through all this. And they try to make everything go through this one cable. But there's no reason why all of this stuff couldn't be going through optical, because we totally can. We do it all the time. But they want to have this HDMI cable, and they force us to use it. So here we are.
There's there's a whole bunch of nitty gritty details to really further explain. Because it's an interesting question, right? It's the thought experiment where if you're just coming from the 100-foot view, you're like, all the time we're saying, hey, your speaker wires are not going to make an audible difference. But then here we are, HDMI cables, where very clearly one works, one doesn't. So if we're saying this type of cable or wire doesn't make a difference to what you see or hear, then why does this other type of cable or wire make a difference? Well, they are sending very different types of signals, and they are working on very different formats for how those signals are interpreted by the receiving device. Yeah. So on the one hand, you wanted to say something?
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, all I was going to say is, I made the flippant remark, just cut the speaker cable. But instead of doing that, because of the tolerances being so tight and so much data being sent through, and all of the stuff that Rob's about to tell you, making a difference in length, even a small difference, a couple of extra meters, or 20 extra feet or something like that, you end up with the cable not being able to pass the full signal. You do the same thing with speaker cable. You just have to have a spool of like 1,000 feet of 18 gauge wire in your room.
Even then, the way it would fail would be different.
It would be different. Yes, so it would not be nothing. It would just be it would be something.
Why that's the case. So first, we do have to start with your speaker wires and your analog interconnects. They are sending analog signals. So when we think of what is an analog signal versus a digital signal, and of course the signal going across HDMI is digital, the difference there is both of them are sending a waveform. They're sending both of them are actually sending a sine wave. Now in the analog cable, it's a variable sine wave, and that variable sine wave is analogous. It has the same frequency as the frequencies of the signal we're trying to send. So in the speaker wire, if you're trying to send 20 kilohertz, there is a 20 kilohertz electrical sine wave being sent down that analog speaker wire. And that gets to the other side, and that 20,000 hertz, 20 kilohertz electrical sine wave gets through a bunch of electronics gets eventually turned into a speaker driver moving at 20,000 kilohertz. It's all the same frequency that's going across these things. They are analogous to one another. They are different types of waves, but each wave is coming in at the same frequency and with changes in amplitude to indicate stronger or weaker, or louder or quieter in the case of audio. So that's going on with analog signals. With a digital signal, there is still a sine wave that's coming across, but it's only coming across at one frequency all the time. There is a fixed frequency at which that sine wave is going, and it is coming in at two different voltages, a high voltage and a low voltage. And those are the only things that are going on. And the receiving unit at the other end of that digital cable is just looking for the switches between high voltage and low voltage. It's always one frequency all the time. So this crazy thing that Monster Cable used to say back in the day of, you have to have different thicknesses because different frequencies travel down the different thicknesses of wire at different speeds. I'm like, that not only is that wrong, just all the way wrong, but then there aren't other frequencies in a digital wire. There's one constant frequency going down there, and you're just looking for high or low voltage. So then you're saying, well, why would that ever fail? As long as you can tell the difference between high and low voltage, why would that ever fail? Well, HDMI doesn't work like other digital signals. HDMI works on timing differences between pairs of wires. Inside an HDMI cable, there are 19 pairs of teeny tiny skinny little wires, and they are both sending the same frequency down that pair of wires, but if you want to send a 0, I don't know which actually way it goes, but if you want to send a 0, then the signal has to arrive at the opposite ends of both of those wires, that pair of wires, at exactly the same time. Or if it's going to be a 1, 0 or 1 in your binary signal, then they have to arrive at slightly askew times. And that's the way that 0 or 1 is sent in HDMI. It's a timing difference between the signal arriving at exactly the same time or slightly askew. Now that is being sent at gigahertz, at billions of times a second. So it's remarkable that it works at all. But as soon as the receiving unit cannot discern between the signals arriving at exactly the same time in these 19 pairs of teeny tiny little wires versus arriving slightly askew, then the signal starts being lost. And now when we're talking gigahertz frequencies, we are talking frequencies high enough that even at 99% the speed of light that electricity is traveling down these wires, it doesn't have to be that long before, just from length, you actually have differences in the arrival times. If you bend that wire too much and one of them is slightly compressed and one of them is slightly stretched, like literally the difference in length can be enough to throw off this timing because the frequency that's being sent is so incredibly high in HDMI. It's remarkable that it ever works at all. So even in an HDMI cable, that sine wave is arriving at the other end. You send it on one end and it arrives at the other end. And maybe because of interference or maybe because of just sheer length, it is slightly weakened or attenuated. The same thing might happen in an analog interconnect. But the analog interconnect is sending a way lower frequency, a hertz or kilohertz frequency, not gigahertz frequency. And it's a stronger signal. And it isn't whether the sine wave arrives or doesn't arrive that matters. In HDMI, it's whether two of them arrive at exactly the same time, and we're splitting it by billionths of a second as to whether they arrived at the same time or slightly askew. So they are very different signals that we're dealing with in your analog cable versus your digital cable to begin with, and then the version of digital signal that HDMI is using is like remarkably flimsy. It's like incredibly fragile. It takes very, very little to knock that off. So that's why you can have an analog signal that arrives. Maybe it's a little bit weakened. Maybe the sine wave is not perfectly smooth all the way, but you can still play that back. Maybe there's a tiny bit of noise involved with that, but it still works. And the amount of distortion and the amount of weakening and the amount of noise that would have to happen to that signal for our ears to be able to detect the difference is way more than what you would be able to see on an oscilloscope or something like that. But in HDMI, a tiny little difference in that timing means that the signal falls apart. It can't tell the difference between 0 and 1 anymore, and it fails. And that's why you can end up with sparklies and things like that, because it's just failing. It doesn't recognize 0 from 1 anymore. Yeah.
I like my art explanation better.
Yours was easier. Yeah.
Jeremy. Over the years, Jeremy says he's used the knowledge he's gained about home theater to slowly make his system better and better, but he doesn't have a dedicated room, just a living room, and he's doing the best he can. He enjoys the online home theater community, but in terms of people he knows in person, he's the only one who's into home theater. Dude, I know. Okay? The only person I know that's in the home theater is Clint, and he's not into it as much as I am. I mean, if that gives you any indication, that's where we are. I mean, it's at least in person. I mean, clearly Rob and I, I guess I've seen Lee in person one time, but how long do I have to work on Lee to get him to buy a subwoofer, period?
That's right.
He says the best anybody else has in his circle of friends and family is a bad soundbar. I don't even think anybody else. No one has speakers that I did not give them, basically. So he's never actually heard anybody else's home theater in person. He thinks his system sounds good, but how does he know? Does hearing other people's home theaters help with ours? Is he overthinking this, or does he need to hear other home theaters so that he has a better frame of reference? No, the frame of reference is the theater. That's the reference. You go to the movie theater
Certainly
and say... This is if this is the goal I'm going for, am I as good as this? Am I better than this? Am I, how do I stack up to this? Now, if you want to compare yourself to other people, you of course can do that. But I mean, I guess you could go to, custom installer places, even Magnolia's, and listen in their little tiny rooms that they have sort of set up, and maybe compared to that. But I don't really see much value in comparing myself to other people's home theaters, because we all make compromises. Almost all of us have to make some sort of compromise. So, why compare yourself to that when really the whole point of having a home theater is to try to make it sound like a theater. So go to the theater. That.
Now, I mean, of course, and we talked about this last week and then some weeks prior. There is some facet to just the sheer size of a commercial movie cinema room that, it's not going to sound literally exactly like that, and you won't have the physical wind flapping your pant legs, even if the sound pressure level is equally high. So expect some minor differences between what you would hear in a commercial movie theater and your home theater. If that is the absolute goal you're going for, then certainly that is the frame of reference. That is more if you're talking home theater. Yes. And that's what all of us are trying to aim for. However, I mean, I would make the argument that in terms of just pure clarity, dialogue intelligibility, delineation between individual sounds, I think you can actually do better at home than a lot of commercial movie theaters. Some of that, again, is just the sheer room size. It's kind of difficult to do some of those things when you have a really, truly physically large room. So in terms of that, I think what he's getting at is like, is my theater the best it can be in my house? How would I know that without hearing somebody else's home theater to compare it to? Maybe he's saying, you know what? I already think it sounds as good or better than a commercial movie theater, but is it as good as it could possibly be in my own house? Without, other home theaters for you to go and listen to. And even if you did, you're not going to be able to compare them back.
No.
They're not one and the same room, and you can't instantaneously switch between them. So you could have an impression of somebody else's home theater and compare that to the impression of yours, but your audio memory isn't long enough or accurate enough for you to make an A-B direct comparison like that. So what I come back to in my home theater, the thing I'm looking for is playing sweeps, which I know is not sexy and it's not exciting, but playing sweeps allows you to determine quite quickly and readily whether what you are hearing in your various seats, because the thing you can do at home is sit in each of your seats and play that sweep on repeat over and over, is you can quickly determine if from seat to seat you are getting what the signal is saying. The signal is saying play all of these frequencies, one after another, in a continuous sweep, all at the same volume. And if you are hearing changes in volume as that sweep is playing, then you know that you are not in whatever seat is producing that. You're not hearing exactly what the signal said to play. Now, you can drive yourself a bit batty with it. I would kind of not recommend relying on Room EQ Wizard measurements and looking at it, because very often you will be able to see non-linearities in a measured graph and not be able to hear them. You genuinely won't hear them when the sweep plays. But if there are large dips or peaks anywhere in the frequency response, you'll hear that. And that's your indication to say, at the very least, I know that what I'm hearing maybe it only happens in one seat, but in that one seat, I'm not hearing exactly what the signal said to play. One tip I would have when playing sweeps is I would have a few separate sweeps that limit the frequency range. I wouldn't just play literally from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz over and over and over again. It's difficult to really get a sense that all of that is staying at a similar volume, perceived volume, and the sweep has
hear that well.
Yeah, the sweep has to be played really loud for that to ever be true. You'd have to play the sweep at 85 decibels for it to subjectively sound equal from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So if you divide it up and maybe you go from 20 hertz to like 200 or 250 hertz, and you just focus on bass, you focus on a bass sweep, and you say, okay, from seat to seat, that sounds pretty uniform and it sounds pretty linear, and you play that nice and loud, and then you have like a mid-range sweep and a treble sweep, and you kind of divide it up just to give your brain a little bit of a rest is part of that. That's something I like to do.
Yeah. Or you can just get Peacock, and then for the first portion of any broadcast, all the voices might be coming out of one speaker.
Right, yeah.
Front right for a while for me.
It's not fun. It's not my theater's fault. It's the source's fault. But that's another thing, too. By
one
playing
announcer
the
was coming out of the
sweeps
center
and knowing
like normal,
that those are working and knowing
one
that
announcer
those
was coming
are
out
accurate.
of just the front right speaker.
We were talking over each other because Skype froze. Yep, fun stuff. Anyway, whatever Tom was saying there, I was just saying that, but part of it is that you play those sweeps, and that tells you, once you say, hey, no matter where I sit in any of my seats, or I know these 3 seats are good and these other 2 ones not so great, as long as I'm sitting in those good seats, I know that, when the signal says play this sound at this volume level, that's what it does. That lets you discern when it's the source's fault and not your theater's fault, because it can be the source's fault. It can be the recording's fault when something doesn't sound good, and that helps you to know and feel confident that your playback system is not the problem.
Right. Infinite Gary. In one of Gary's setups, he's using a Lexicon MC12 Pre-Pro with Parasound A51 amplifier. They both have slightly unusual 12-volt trigger connections. The Lexicon has a Phoenix terminal for its 12-volt trigger outputs, and the Parasound has a 2.5mm jack for its trigger input, rather than the typical 3.5mm jacks. I thought that they were always 2.5mm for triggers. Am I wrong?
No, 2.5.
I thought they were always...
IR extenders are quite often 2.5.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
But the 12-volt triggers are typically a 3.5 millimeter connection. That part doesn't make too much of a difference. But the Phoenix terminal on the back of that Lexicon MC12, you don't see that
what you get for
often.
getting that specialized high-end gear there. You gotta have the special connectors back there to make you feel special. He's looked into getting all the necessary adapters, but he honestly doesn't want to bother with all of that, especially since there are already a ton of wires behind his Lexicon. So we found the Panamax surge protector with master and slave outlets plus a 12-volt trigger jack. He needs to convert 3.5 to 2.5 millimeter, but that's no problem. However, once he had it, he discovered it's a trigger input on the Panamax, not a trigger output. You can trigger the slave outputs to turn on, but what he wants and needs is for a 12-volt trigger signal to be sent out when the device is plugged into the master outlet. When the device plugged into the master outlet is turned on. Frustrating, he says. I find it humorous, but not frustrating.
Why would a surge protector have a 12-volt input? Like, what? Why? I agree. Why wouldn't that be an output or let you choose? That is a bizarre thing.
It should have a switch or something on it, right?
Yes, he wasn't expecting.
So his Parasound amp does have an auto on via signal sensing, but he found it a bit unreliable and too slow. He just wants to be able to power on this Lexicon with its remote and have the Parasound amp power on at the same time. Too much to ask. He can live with just manually turning on the amp, but it seems like things should be simpler than this. Any ideas? Just don't buy this kind of gear ever again? Do we do that?
Too late
It's
now.
like now that you've got it. So the amp is the pre-pro, the Parasound is the amp.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, the real solution is to buy the adapters and then plug the Lexicon into the Parasound the way it's supposed to be.
I mean, it does.
That's the real solution.
Yeah, the Lexicon does have a 12-volt trigger output. It's a Phoenix connector, but you can get a Phoenix to 3.5 millimeter adapter.
I don't even know what that is. I am looking that up. What is a Phoenix connector?
That's that one. It's like a little terminal block. So you kind of put the bare wires into the little
those green things,
green terminal block,
those
and then
are
the little
awful.
terminal block plugs in there. I mean, it's just bare
You can
wires.
probably-
It's literally just a pair of wires.
I think you can just strip the
Yeah,
3.5.
You
and
could.
You could just strip the 3.5 or 2.5 or whatever cable they have, one end of it, and then insert it into that Phoenix connector. That's really, I guess that's, you don't have to buy an adapter. You just strip it.
Although, I mean, they have just Phoenix terminal block to 3.5 millimeter adapters, and then a 3.5 millimeter to 2.5 millimeter adapter, which, I mean, they're very skinny and they're very small. So it's,
that's,
I mean,
not a big
that
cable.
really would be the most reasonable solution in this case, because you do have a 12-volt trigger output on the Lexicon, and you do have a 12-volt trigger input on the Parasound. So, really going any far afield is not necessary. But one thing I did want to talk about is it is a bit strange in my mind that we don't just have a simple consumer available like little IR sensor, that just takes an IR command from any infrared remote and then sends out a 12-volt trigger pulse in response. Like, why isn't that a common device? It's a little bit strange. I've found lots of people on various forums asking for exactly that, because many people have that situation. They have an amplifier, it's got a 12-volt trigger input, but for whatever reason, their source device does not have a 12-volt trigger output, and they're like, why can't I just have I push a button on my remote and it powers on the amplifier? It just sends a 12-volt pulse. Why isn't that a thing? So what a lot of people have resorted to doing is like using a Raspberry Pi. And you have a little USB IR, receptor that goes into the Raspberry Pi, and then you've got a little USB to, 3.5 millimeter 12-volt output, and they use that type of little device. It is weird though that there isn't something just on the market to do this, but I guess it just isn't common enough. There are a number of like various 12-volt output things, especially for car audio, so a lot of custom installers will kind of dig into that and do it. But yeah, there isn't just a simple little box you can sit somewhere to do this. So some people have resorted to smart outlets and things like that, so they can trigger it from an app on their phone. But I wouldn't necessarily want to do that for a big high-powered amplifier and plug that into a smart outlet, because those are usually current constrained. Yeah. So for this case, Gary, get the adapter cables. That's the best solution.
Gurinder wound up pulling the trigger on a brand new 65-inch Sony A80J OLED. We weren't lying. They really are ridiculously thin, and compared to even his JVC projector, there really is nothing like the contrast of true black. His JVC is still away being serviced. The repair shop actually said they're bringing in a tech from JVC themselves, so it sounds like something is up. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, he put the new OLED in the theater, and even though the intention was to put the OLED in the living room, well, now he's thinking it might be really nice to have an OLED in the theater for watching TV with the lights on, and then his 120-inch screen could come down in front of it for movies. But if he did that, there were a couple of issues. One reason he had a retractable screen in the first place is because there's a window on the front wall of the theater. He blocks it off with blackout curtains when the projector is on, but they still like to be able to access the window. If the TV goes on the stand in front of the room, it's going to block most of the visible window. Not much you can do about that. But he's also concerned that if they ever leave the curtains open, there might be sunlight hitting the back of the OLED. So what do we think? They don't really want to leave the blackout curtains closed 100% of the time, but if the TV is going to block most of the view of the window anyway, is it worth trying to come up with some way to protect the back of the TV from direct sunlight when the curtains are open? Or does this room need just remain blacked out all the time from now on? Or does the OLED go into the living room instead as originally intended? Okay, so I understand how you've gotten to this place.
Oh, yes.
Like, I can see how you've gotten to this place.
Yep.
But the too long didn't read answer is put it in the living room and stop it.
because
there is
you really
certainly that solution.
you really because I've had the same setup where I've had a projector that drops down in front of a window, and then you put the thing up, and then you open the window, the blackout curtains on the window, and your room becomes your room again. It's like it just looks like a normal room. I like that solution. I think it's a very good solution, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to it. This just gives you another little 5.7 point something setup that you get to set up in the living room, which will be something for you to do. I do understand why you would like to have this better contrast, better picture, but I just don't think it's gonna. I mean, I think that you should just stick with your original plan. That's my gut.
Yeah, I mean, on the larger, not just specific to Gurinder answer, having a TV, a regular flat panel TV positioned right in front of a window, that is a concern. I mean, they say it right in the manual, right? Not to put your TV in a place where it's going to be hit by direct sunlight all the time. That can be an issue. That's a legitimate concern, and it's why usually if you were going to set up a flat panel TV in front of a window, you'd want to. It doesn't necessarily have to be like blackout curtains, but you'd want to have, shades or sheer curtains at the very least, that whenever there is sunlight, those would be closed at all times so that you don't have direct sunlight just streaming, right onto the back of the TV. That is a legitimate concern. So if the idea is that you like to be able to open up the curtains and actually see out the window, then even just having, sheer curtains that are closed at all times or shades that are back there. So you have natural light coming in, but you don't really get to see out of that window anymore. To me, that would be what you would have to do in terms of the safety of the flat panel. I'd want to have sheer curtains or shades. You can have some natural light. It's not blackout, but you wouldn't have direct sunlight coming in on the back of that TV at all times. So if the idea is that when you open up the curtains and you're not watching television, you're able to see out of that window, then the solution here is exactly what Tom said. That OLED is going to go in the living room as originally intended, and you're going to go back to the retractable screen.
It's either that or you're going to have some way of moving it out of the way and all this other stuff, and that just becomes a hassle.
I mean, I can envision Gurinder saying, hey, this is a great excuse for me to have motorized curtains of some kind. You press the button and the curtains close in behind the television.
Yeah.
But if the idea is to look out that window, you're really only going to want it open up when the sunlight is not going to be coming in and hitting the back of the TV, and then it's like kind of dim, and is that when you want to be looking out the window? So it seems like this is not really a great position for a flat panel TV. That's what it sounds like.
All right, so we'll answer this question, but it's moot if you follow our advice.
Sure.
So there's also the center speaker to consider. If he just eyeballs a comfortable height for the OLED and puts it there, he has to lower his current center speaker position, keeping the center where it is. The TV looks a bit high up, and it also blocks even more of the window. He also wonders if having a big flat surface directly above the center speaker will affect its sound, which was the big flat surface would be the ceiling?
Would be the TV. Right, he didn't have a TV right above and behind his center before. Now he does.
So all in all, what do we think we should do? Well, we think we shouldn't put your TV in here, but
but on the broader scale again, because this is bringing up topics. This applies to many people, right? This is exactly the scenario in which they find themselves. So that's why it's useful to talk about it, not just for Gurinder, but
there's a big difference between raising your TV up too high because it's blocking more of a window, and raising up your TV too high because it's now literally too high. You're having to move your eyes up. Your natural, and I wrote the article. I think I published it. I don't remember. Writing an article about, what is the proper height for your TV? Because people look. I am not even lying to you. I saw a guy whose TV was almost on the ground, and he had it angled forward slightly because that would give it the perfect. If you're sitting erect in a chair and you're looking directly face straight forward, then yes, your TV would now be.
Oh, so like it was near the ground and then tilted back?
Yeah, it was weird. It was tilted. And I was like, I had no idea how this, because every time you go online and somebody posts a picture of this, your TV's too high.
Right.
You don't know that. You can't see that just by seeing it on a wall. So your natural height for your TV should be at your resting eye line. Your eyes rest sort of angled down slightly. My eyes do. I don't look straight directly forward. They kind of
rest downward slightly, and then,
if
you recline on top of it.
Yeah, if you're reclined, then that changes it a little bit. And the actual angle, if you're always reclined when you're sitting in your theater,
right,
then it might be a slight upward angle at that point, right? Even if your natural resting eye line is slightly down when you're standing perfectly vertical, when you're reclined in a chair, then that angle might be slightly up. So yeah, figure out where that resting eye line goes.
So, you know, he's talking about his TV just being too high for this window. What should he do about that?
There's
well,
that.
At this point, I would say, well, you've already covered up most of the window. Who gives a what about the rest
At this
of the
point,
window?
we're going to just, if you, like, if Gurinder ignores our advice and says, no, I really have decided I want to keep this in the theater, I think we're at the point where, like, I think that window is just going to be covered in some form or fashion at all times. Like I said, it doesn't have to be blackout. It doesn't have to be, if the idea is you just want natural light in the room while you're watching TV, then it doesn't have to be completely blackout, but there's going to be something, at least a sheer shade or a sheer curtain that is covering that window at all times. So now we're not worried about the view. Now we're not worried if the television is obstructing the window anymore. That view is gone. That basically has to be gone if the TV is indeed going to stay in the theater. But then, yeah, his concern is the center speaker, right? He had it set up very nicely with his projection screen set up where he was okay with the projection screen, basically like the top of the projection screen being higher, because when you go into a lot of movie theaters, the screen is way up high and you're reclining back and you're sort of looking upward at the screen, and that all feels natural for a big movie screen. Then his center speaker was height-wise where he wanted it to be, but now with the television, eyeballing it, saying that's about the height I want the TV, it means the center speaker either has to be lower or keep the center speaker where it is and raise the TV. So, I mean, that's the compromise. I mean, you can't have the center speaker in front of the screen or behind the screen of a flat panel. That isn't going to work. The center speaker could theoretically go above a flat panel and just be tilted down, but his screen is not acoustically transparent, so that would mean purchasing a new acoustically transparent projection screen. So it's going to be a compromise. I mean, to me, the compromise is you get the center speaker about as low as you're willing to accept, which to me is probably about 18 inches off the ground. That's about as low as I'm kind of like, normally I'd like to have it about 2 feet off the ground, but 18 inches is sort of acceptable. Lower than that, and it starts getting into the range where you can sort of just audibly tell, even with your eyes are watching.
Well, you know, the TV and this idea of having this flat panel, you know, right above his center speaker, you know, most of the time the TV is a little bit behind at the very least. You know, the speaker will be proud, hopefully proud, or at least up to the edge of the cabinet or whatever it's in. Or if this TV is wall mounted, it is definitely behind, because unless it's a in wall center channel, there's a box involved, so it has to be in front of. You know, all the treble and stuff like that is all going to be coming out straight forward and not wrapping around the speaker too much. It's going to be very directional. The bass is going to be wrapping around, and yes, it will reflect off of that flat panel back there, but, you know, I mean, you can't put absorption panels on it, so
nope.
You know, what are you going to do? You're going to do nothing, because that's what your options are. You have no options. You have to. There's just going to be a flat panel there.
Yeah, I mean,
and
I
honestly,
do have to say,
you're not going to really notice anything, I don't think.
In my own little home theater, when you just walk into the room, when you walk into the room standing up, everything looks fine. When you just sit down in my couch, which is a reclining couch, but when you just first sit down, because I'm very close to my setup, and I did get the type of stand. I mean, I made sure that the stand had the heights that I wanted, so that the center speaker is not right up at ear level, of course, it being a flat panel mount. It is a bit lower, but it's a little bit higher than where a lot of TV stands would put it, and I did that on purpose because I wanted the center speaker to be relatively close to seated ear height. And that does mean when you first sit down on my couch, that TV looks like it's too high, but thankfully I have a reclining couch, so once I recline, it all feels comfortable, and my TV is ever so slightly angled down. Not a ton, but you can't even really see it when you first walk in, but there is a little bit of a downward angle so that my eye is like, perpendicular to the plane of the screen. So that can work. I mean, he just got this OLED. He never had this flat panel set up in his theater before. So he's like, just eyeballing it, that's where I'd put the TV. Having the flat panel a little bit higher than your initial instinct, and maybe
it's probably fine.
Yeah, maybe it is angled down just a little bit, and I know he has recliners, so that would probably all work out. It is a series of compromises, though, and like I say, this applies to more than just Gurinder. Lots of people are dealing with this exact scenario where they're going by the advice, right? They're trying to work out all the angles that they read about, and they're like drawing it on a diagram and using a protractor or whatever, and they're like, man, there's no way to make all of the recommended angles work together. There is a little bit of give and take that has to be done with this, but having reclining seats really helps.
Well, one of the other things that I worry about is the most common advice you hear online about where to put your TV is your eyes should be in the center of the TV, and I just don't think that's true.
That's the TV is too low, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I want it at
I think so too.
1/3 of the TV's height from the bottom of the screen.
And that I think is one of, and then when you take into account the angles that you're at by reclining your seat and everything else, and then I mean. When we sit in here and watch TV, we are always reclined. There is anybody who refuses to recline a seat in my theater gets fussed at because we have to share. We have three seats and
then the
4 or 5
uneven.
people. The backs are uneven, and whatever. Everybody's trying to even out the backs and stuff like that. But no one ever just sits here with the. It's always reclined. Even if you lie down on the couch, it's not as comfortable if you don't recline it at least a little bit.
But I mean, of course, there's a lot of people who their setup, they just have a couch. They just have a sectional or a food, and it's not a recliner. And that plays into it. It is important to consider that. Because, I mean, of course, the other common advice that we see all the time is the flat panel goes above your fireplace, which we would never recommend for a multitude of reasons. But that almost always does put the TV too high. Even if you have a reclining seat, it's still too high. So,
right. So what Clint has, he has his TV above his fireplace, and he's got a mantle mount. And the mantle mounts work good if you're into this sort of thing because they have they pull up, they pull forward and down, and then they have a thing on the bottom that looks like a handle, which you can use as a handle, but also it'll turn red if the TV is getting too hot.
If it's getting too hot. Cool.
Which is a good warning system for you. So, that if you're going to put it above the TV, I would always suggest getting a mantle mount. That's just me.
Yeah.
John has started tumbling down the rabbit hole with his DIY subwoofer plan. Is this the same dude with the cat thing?
Your flat cat subs, yes.
Flat cat sub,
This is John, yes. Yeah.
He's deep into AVS forum and finding recommendations for different 18-inch drivers. He started by asking us about Scar audio driver, then Date, and now he's wondering about a certain Phi car audio drivers that some forum people are excited about. Don't. Jeez. They get excited about stuff, and they say it's the best thing in the world, and then you get it, and you're like,
they got it. It must be, right?
Must be, yeah.
Not only is what they bought, not only must that be great, but everything else, especially anything else that costs more, must be worse. That's just how it works. That's how logic works.
And he's also started wondering about dual driver designs and open baffle frames and all kinds of other ideas. It's all gone beyond the realm of our expertise, but can we maybe bring a little calm and sanity to this whole project? Get off the internet. 2 subs for a 15 by 40 foot space, and you prefer for them to be tall and narrow with loud, deep, below 20 hertz output. What do we think you should do? I think you should buy some subs from SVS.
That's one solution, but he doesn't want to pay that much, and that I can appreciate. And DIY can get you this at a lower price. That I have no problem with. As long as you're willing to put in the effort and the labor and the time, you can do it for less money.
I would buy or download or find plans that were already done by somebody else that have been verified to work. I would not try to design this thing from scratch. I would not try to make my own crossover, my own DSPs. I would not try to brace my own box. I mean,
because last week it was the bracing we were concerned about.
I don't want you to be offended, but it is clear at this point that you don't know what you're doing, and that's okay. Okay.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like this is his. If this isn't his first go at making a DIY subwoofer altogether, it's his first at this design. Definitely, it's the first time at this design. Well, and he's doing the intelligent thing of researching as much as he can and trying to use software as much as he can. But as we've talked about with Gary Yakubian from SVS, who definitely make subwoofers and have experience doing that, what they design in software is not the final product. And they do have prototypes in between.
25 different driver designs they went through before they settled on one for the 2000 series
and John doesn't have the budget to prototype this thing repeatedly over and over. So that's why he's so worried that he wants to get this absolutely right the first time, that he is I mean, the email that he sent, and I started reading it, but like I was trying to parse it. I'm like, look, there is no way that I can answer all of these in detail. The problem is that he has completely tumbled down the rabbit hole at this point, and so, it's just becoming overwhelming.
List again. No offense. When I say that you don't know what you're doing, I'm not saying that you're unintelligent or incapable of doing it correctly. What I'm saying is you don't start cooking by trying to invent béarnaise sauce. That's not where you start. You start by going someplace and learning how to cook, and then you innovate from there. So what I think you should do is you should find a plan that already exists. You should follow it. Now, that plan could be as complicated or as simple. It could be a Dayton Audio, prepackaged thing where they send you all the parts and all you do is screw it together, or it can be this is the dimensions. You have to cut all these, the pieces of MDF out yourself. You have to do all the routing. You have to do everything, and all of that. It could be, those are the two spectrums as far as, two ends of the spectrum. The DIY kit and the DIY, here's the paper plans with dimensions and nothing else on there. Figure it out. So there's the spectrum there. Find where you feel like you are comfortable, and then build that subwoofer, and then from there, then decide, okay, now that I've done all this, what have I learned from this process? Then you can go back and say, now I'm going to design a bookshelf speaker. Now I'm going to design, a tower speaker or another subwoofer. But this time I'm going to,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to, add some of the things I've learned from here and try to maybe make some changes. Or you take the box that you currently have and say, what can I change about this design that would make it different or better? Like, I want it to be thinner and I want it to be taller. So then what do I need to do to make those things happen? And then do that. So that's where I would go.
And to that end, to not leave John hanging and to give him a place where, not only to start, I think this might be the place you finish, if you're willing to go with that advice. GSG, which a lot of us, even in the home theater world, we don't necessarily think of the GSG brand, but a lot of us have heard of MartySubs. MartySubs are a very popular DIY subwoofer. You can get their completely prefabricated cabinets where they have done all the assembly, and what you're going to do is insert a driver and connect an amplifier. They, on some of their models, sell fully finished subwoofers, and when they sell one of their fully finished Marty subwoofers, or what was the other one called, a decimator or something like that? It's a name like that, similar to that, but they sell some fully finished, and when they do, they are like $3,000, $2,500 to $3,500 subs, and that's not outlandish at all. I mean, compare it to the JTRs and compare it to the Power Sound Audios and their upper tier. They're 18 and 21 inch driver models and stuff that they have. They're right in line with that. These have been tested. These have been measured. These have been confirmed to be a design that works. They give you a selection of different drivers, and happily, one of the top recommended drivers, in fact, GSG's own top recommended 18-inch driver is the very same Dayton driver that John was already considering. So you don't even have to move off of that plan. And to get you really, really in the ballpark of everything that you've been asking for, they have a model of their MartySub that they call their BTS, in this case, behind the screen, not behind the scenes, but behind the screen design. And the reason is this was to have the shallow depth, 17 inches. Now, John was looking for 15 inches wide. This could be adapted because one of the things you can do is download the manual for how this is all constructed, and there are diagrams and there are all the dimensions, and they show you how the bracing is constructed and how their
there's
port's
just
designed.
so much bracing compared to what
there is so much bracing, which here's a clue, here's an indicator, because they are not using thin walls, John. These subs end up weighing like 165, 185 pounds. Okay, there are no corners cut in this stuff. But I mean, if this were me, if I were trying to take on a DIY subwoofer project, and this is the type of output and the type of extension that I was going for, I would consider I would probably spring for the fully constructed cabinet because I don't even want to do all the gluing and clamping and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I could consider the flat pack. If this was about price, I could conceive of getting the flat pack and doing that gluing and clamping and all of that myself, because all the cuts are done for me. This is like Lego assembly. This is like grown-up Lego assembly to do it at that point. I could conceive of doing that. If you want to go further, if you want to have your own materials and do the cuts yourself and all that, you can follow the plans that are provided.
I was going to say, they literally, you're right. So I started looking at this. Oh, I like how they braced it to the wall. Holy crap.
Yeah. And I mean, this is really close to the dimensions and everything that you were looking for. And if it's a matter of an inch or two, you can just recalculate. It's going to be a little bit taller or a little bit longer so that it can be a little bit narrower, keeping the internal volume the same. But you can really closely follow this BTS
but
behind
17 inches and 15
design.
Inches. Who cares? That's close enough.
Well, maybe he worked it out and 15 is literally all he can fit or something. But this could be slightly modified to work exactly the way you want. And then it's using the same 18-inch driver you were already considering. And I mean, they're suggesting to go with like a 1250 watt amp. He was going to use a 775 watt amp. As long as you're not maxing it out, you will be absolutely fine with the amplifier that you already have. It can power that driver without problem. So this gets you so darn close and takes so much of the guesswork out of it that, like, as far as a recommendation that I'm happy to make, this is it. All the other really getting down into the nitty gritty and the crazy differences that he was starting to talk about in the email he sent, I don't know enough to advise you on that. I would wash my hands of it, because once you start getting down into that rabbit hole, it's way too deep for my knowledge. But this GSG, the plans that they've got, the MartySubs, they've been tested, they've been measured, and I'd be happy to recommend that. So I hope that maybe helps.
Coaxial. Okay. On the speaker front, what do we think of HSUs or shoes? Shoe? I don't know. We have to say it a special way.
They say to just say shoe now. It's so much easier.
CCB 8 model. It's their high efficiency, high power handling coaxial bookshelf speaker. And it's available in all black now instead of the yellow cone that Tom hated so much. I really don't care that much. I just think it's ugly. $700 for a pair, so it's a bit more expensive than the $300 each that John mentioned, but within reason. Over double is within reason.
No, $50 more, because he was $300 each.
Oh, nice.
So $600 a pair versus $700 a pair. He's like, that's within reason. He can conceive of that.
He still wants front towers, so he's mostly considering the CCB 8 model as a center and surrounds. I would go all the way around with this thing. I think they're fine.
Sure.
They're a coaxial driver, so that's what I was throwing me off. They have dual ports in the back, so you want to keep them off of a wall if you can. And like you said, he's got a black driver versus the yellow driver as well. But these have they do or don't have grills. They must have grills. I don't see any grills.
Oh, there are. They are just circular and they're magnetic, so you still sort of have the same look, but you can cover up that driver.
So who cares if it's yellow or not? I mean,
where the dust cap of a normal woofer would go, that is just a acoustically transparent grill, and back there in the very center of the woofer is the tweeter, and it is so it's not like a full compression tweeter. It's not quite that. It's a modified horn. So it's not a concentric design. They are not sharing the exact same plane on the front. The tweeter is recessed into the throat of the woofer, and that acts as a horn. And that gets it up to very high efficiency, 94 decibel efficiency with 1 watt. And these are high power handling. They can absorb 400 watts continuously. So when you're starting with 94 dB from 1 watt, and then you can pump 400 watts into it continuously, these can definitely play loud. They're a good design. I haven't heard them in person. I haven't either. I can't say for certain that I love their sound or not. As far as the measurements go, as far as the reviews go, nobody is indicating that these are a bad speaker. Nobody's indicating that.
50 hertz to 20 kilohertz at plus or minus 2 dB is pretty flat.
It's pretty darn
kind of
good.
what we're looking for.
Yep.
So,
but
nobody's saying that they're bad.
I agree with Tom. If you were going to make this your center and your surrounds, I would use them as my front, left, right as well. Because, I mean, are you really, like, where's the scenario where your front, left, and right speakers are playing like 12 decibels louder than your center. So that doesn't make any sense. So why you would need different front speakers other than just looks, that's fine. But you can make pedestals. Clearly he's handy enough to make a DIY sub. You can make pedestals that perfectly match the footprint of these, and then they look like towers once they're standing on top of those pedestals. So I would certainly do that. But just as a reminder from last week, he hasn't put up his acoustic treatments yet. He hasn't applied his EQ yet. He hasn't integrated with subwoofers yet. Don't replace your speakers until you've done all of those things, because I don't think you might even need new speakers yet. But if you do, I'm not opposed to these HSUs at all.
They look all right.
Yeah.
Jack has decided to go with an LG OLED as an upgrade for the 65-inch plasma he's been using for many years. His front wall has windows to the left and right. He would mount the new OLED in between the windows, same as his current plasma. He's sitting 13 feet away, so he's thinking it'd be nice to go up in screen size to 77-inch, but going by the measurements, a 77-inch would just fit and just go window to window. Does it seem like it would be aesthetically unappealing? And we would recommend a larger 77-inch from a 13-foot distance. I would say that if my TV overlapped those windows a little bit, I'd be okay with that too, because who cares? Number one.
Yeah, I mean, 13 feet away. Just
77 is not big enough for 13 feet. Right. Let me just say, it's not big enough for 13 feet. So if the question is, would I go for 77 or something smaller? I would not go for something smaller.
Yeah, just to give you the math, from 13 feet away, a 77-inch OLED is giving you a 24-degree field of view, that's actually the minimum that SMPTE recommends for high definition, not 4K, but for high definition. 24-degree field of view is the minimum that SMPTE or THX would recommend. So at least you've come up to the minimum now, because at the moment with your 65-inch, you've got a 20-degree field of view, and you're below the recommended minimum. So at least the 77 gets you to the minimum. I think a screen that is like perfectly nestled, window to window in there, I think that would actually look great, because they got like no bezels. There's essentially no bezel. So it's just, you've got this image that perfectly goes between your windows. I think that'd look great.
I'm trying to find the article. So he measured, and his eyes are at 40 inches from the ground when he's sitting. So how high should a 77-inch TV be mounted on the wall? Again, are you reclining? Because I mean, we can kind of see.
We do have some images further down, and at the moment, his current seat is not a recliner. So we know that much for the moment, although things might change.
Right. So basically, again, I don't think that halfway is the good part, mark. I think that, what I tell you to do is sit in your chair, relax, just kind of relax your face, relax your eyes, and kind of look forward. And what spot on the wall are you looking at without having to, point your eyes in any given direction? Where are you seeing? And that's the point where a third up from the bottom of your screen should be. And then say to yourself, am I going to buy a recliner someday? And if so, I should probably move it up a little bit.
Now, just going by the information we have at the moment, if the eyes are 40 inches above the floor, just calculating if that were parallel to the floor, all right? If your resting eye line were parallel to the floor, that I would have the bottom edge of the TV. So forget about what the height of the screen is, all right? Just the bottom of the edge of the TV at that point would be 27 inches above the floor. If my eyes are at 40 inches and my resting eye line is parallel to the floor, then the bottom edge of my TV is going to be at 27 inches off the floor. So, I mean, just sort of eyeballing what he's already got in there, that TV stand looks like one of the typical ones that's about 19 or 20 inches tall. So it looks as though the bottom edge of his current plasma is maybe a little bit higher than 27 inches. I don't think it would really be a problem. If the bottom edge of a new 77-inch OLED were slightly lower than what he has right now, he's got room. He's got some space above where his current center speaker is. He's got some space on the wall there, some visible space. So if the bottom edge of the new 77-inch OLED were a little bit lower, like I'm talking 3-4 inches lower than your current TV, that's not going to look out of place or be a problem. So I definitely think this is doable.
Yeah, I think you just use your current location without having to.
Actually, you can probably keep the very same wall mount. And
that's what I would almost certainly
do. With
do
an OLED, actually, no, because with an OLED, the mounting holes are way down towards the bottom because the way that the thing is designed, it's all skinny at the top, and the mounting holes are at the bottom. Yeah.
Well, who knows what kind of mount he's got back there? Maybe he's got the ability to move it around. Yeah. So there's a LG C1 and the more expensive G1. He does not play video games at all, so none of those features are a priority. What would he be giving up if he went with the less expensive C1 model? I don't know. What would he be giving up, Rob?
All right, so I'm going to say the easy answer first, because anybody who just wants the easy answer, you can stop here. I'm going to say you're giving up nothing.
Okay, there you go.
That's the easy answer. Now, technically, if you're playing a HDR test pattern, yes, the G1 can measurably get a little bit brighter. Not the whole screen. The whole screen can get a tiny bit brighter. I'm talking like a 10% window or a 2% window. A little white box on an all black screen technically can measure a little bit brighter, about 70, 80 nits brighter on the G1. You're not going to have a G1 side by side with the C1 to compare it. You're not going to be looking at a measurement meter instead of real images. In terms of what your eye sees in terms of contrast and enjoying the image, I say you're giving up nothing. I don't think the Evo panels are worth paying $1,000 more for to get that slightly measurably higher brightness on a 10 or 2% window. Now, of course, the physical design is different. Just the body of the thing is different, and how they mount onto the wall is different. If what you want is an absolutely flat, flush against the wall, looks like there's basically no depth to it at all, then that's what the G1 is for. That was the whole point of the gallery design. The G in the gallery is, the G stands for gallery, is to have it completely flat against the wall and have no space at all. I'm actually looking, and he's got like that little perimeter around his windows. And he's saying that the width of the TV might literally go like window to window. I'm like, it might be a big advantage in your case to have the very front bezel of the screen have a little depth from the wall.
So it can miss those molding around the
That's
windows.
right. Yeah. So I say get the C1 all day long and save the $1,000.
There you go.
Or
His
actually
current
2,000
Onkyo,
on the 77.
all right. His current Onkyo 809 receiver won't be able to pass through HDR or Dolby Vision. It doesn't have eARC, so that's going to need an upgrade too. Well, we've already talked about that, so you know what to get or not get, as the case may be. He's got a 5.2.2 speaker configuration. He does not intend to ever change that in this room, so 7 channels is enough, but he wants good room correction. He also wants pre-outs. So given that gaming is not part of all this, could he score a deal on a receiver model that doesn't do HDMI 2.1? Would that be okay in his case? He's a bit concerned about heat since he's heard the newest Denon and Marantz models can run a bit hot. I've not heard that. He's got his Onkyo 809, and I mean, you're coming from an Onkyo and you're going to worry about being running hot. I mean, only receiver I've ever known to catch on fire was an Onkyo.
Well, that's why I'm putting this detail in here.
Yeah, he's got his Onkyo 809 on his TV stand up front, and it only has about an inch of a half an inch of space above it, but it's open on all sides. So, and the Onkyo has never had any problems. So, given all that, which AV receiver model would we recommend to him? So, he wants good room correction. He wants to be able to pass through everything.
Yeah.
HDR
Although he isn't really worried about HDMI 2.1. He's not really worried about that
because you don't need it for HDR or Dolby Vision. So,
that's right.
It doesn't need VRR or any of the other high bandwidth stuff.
Doesn't need 4K 120 for video signals.
So, I mean, basically, yeah, just go to Accessories for Less and pick up a Denon or a high-end Yamaha. But with I think the 3000 series, whatever that is, 37, whatever it is.
At the moment we're recording this, they have some 3600Hs. So that's the 2019 model was the 3600H for $900. I think that's a pretty darn good deal to get that. They do have some 3700Hs at Accessories for Less. Those are going for $1,100 right now. So, I mean, you could get the 2020 or be up to date, have the single HDMI 2.1 input and go and order the SPK 618 just to have it on hand for $200 more. But in his case, in terms of what he actually needs, $900 for the X3600H, I think is a good way to go. Now, he's going to be saying, okay, that one has 9 amplifiers built in. It can process 11 speakers. I only need 7. But you have to get up to that series to get the best version of Odyssey, Multi-Q XT 32. You have to go up to the 3000 series to get that. Below that, it's regular Multi-Q XT, and he talked about room correction. But that's also how high you have to go in the series to get pre-outs. There isn't really any way around that. We mentioned the new Onkyos that are coming out. You got to go all the way up to the $1,400 model to get pre-outs on that. We mentioned the Yamahas, the new ones that are coming out. You could, in that instance, go with, like the A4A, because that is the 7-channel model that does have pre-outs. But that one, how much did we say the A4A was? It was over $1,200, right? Wasn't it 12 or 1,300?
I don't remember. I'd have to scroll up.
Yeah, it was right in that price range. So, in terms of what is the deal, the X3600H from Accessories for Less is getting you everything you need, a little bit more than what you genuinely need, but it's all the things you want for $900. I think that's a good way to go here.
Yeah. Okay. So he sent a bunch of pictures so we could look at his room. He says it sounds good to him, but maybe he doesn't know what he's missing. So do we have any suggestions for him for improving the room itself? Well, he's already done the first thing that I would say. He's got a love seat-ish thing. I think it's a love seat.
It's like a slightly wide seat. It's not quite love seat width, I don't think. It's like a 1 3/4.
Anyways, it's just big enough to fit between two. He's got glass doors. Glass French doors everywhere in this room. There's like, well, there's at least 2 sets, and then there's glass windows everywhere else. So there's maybe there's 4. I don't know. There's a lot. Anyway, so he has it's a hardwood floor. He's got a rug on the floor. He's got a love seat ish at the back. He's got a single leather seat that doesn't look like it reclines, but maybe it does. I can't tell. And then he's got pillows behind his head on the walls, it looks like. So he's already started putting something back there to make sure that he's not getting, or at least reducing the reflection. So the first thing I would have said is put some absorption behind your head, because you're literally sitting on the back wall. That couch is touching the back wall. But
and I mean, this is an instance where I'm like, could he pull that seat forward? It would probably look a little bit weird in this room to pull that seat forward away from the wall. I mean, I would... Yeah, I don't know. That one is tough to try and pull that seat forward given the layout of the room.
He's got very little wall space left in here to put absorptive panels. No corners that I can find.
He does, though, have a framed picture directly above the back of his seat. So that could be a printed panel behind your seat instead of, squishing pillows behind your head every time you sit down.
If he just gets a thin panel that's like a 2 feet by maybe 4 feet back there, the same color as a wall, he could probably mount that right above his that way you don't have to keep putting pillows behind your head. That you could do. There's maybe 1 or 2 spaces on walls around here that have a picture on there that could either be turned into a panel or removed and replaced with panels, but there's no corners. I really don't see much that you can do in this room acoustically to make it sound any better. What's that?
I said there's kind of corners. They're not wide corners, but
he doesn't have. He's got furniture in every single corner.
That's true. Yeah,
you have to start moving. He's got lamps. He's got. I think it's a sub over there too. By that lamp.
It looks like it.
And then there's bookshelves or cabinets or something, and everything, and all the other ones. So I just don't see a ton of space. Just above that white bookshelf is like the only wall space I see where you could definitely put a panel there. Now, should you? I don't know. In this room, I don't really see that.
Right.
There's a whole lot you can do. And if it sounds good to you, then I would literally just get the panel for behind my head. I think that's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, I might consider, because something could maybe be done in sort of the front corners, but how much of it, like it probably wouldn't be straddling panels in the front corners. It would be, more like something that goes 90 degrees into the corners. How much of an audible difference that would really make if that's all you're doing is pretty questionable. The center speaker, because he has a record player on top of his stand there, his center speaker is not centered. His center speaker is off center from the TV. And it's got,
I bet it's centered to where he sits.
To where he sits, which would be fine. And I mean, it is at the end of the world if it's there. I don't see anything damping below that center speaker. I actually
was wondering about the subwoofer too, whether or not he's got any feet or anything on there too.
So something to damp, and the tower speakers too, for that matter. If everything is hard,
I can't tell if those are. It looks like he's got there's something square that could just be the base of the.
I'm pretty sure that's just the base of the tower speaker stand. So everywhere that you've got hard connections, hard connection between the center speaker and the TV stand, hard connection between your tower speakers and the floor, hard connection between the subwoofers and the floor. All of those you can have damping. That could make a very noticeable difference, to be honest. Yeah, and then because he's got quite a bit in this room, I wouldn't expect it to literally be like echoey. That's not really the concern, because I think he's got just enough stuff in this room that it's preventing that type of thing. I do think right behind your head is certainly a prime candidate for acoustic treatment.
Yeah, I just don't think that without major decluttering of the space, basically taking a bunch of stuff out of here just so that you could put panels up and corner trapping and stuff like that. I don't, and I'm not asking you to do that. I don't see that putting a panel or 2 here or there is going to make a huge difference.
Right.
The panel behind your head, yes.
Right behind your head, you'd notice. Yeah.
That's one of the ones I would would do, but other than just decoupling everything that you can, I think that's about it. Martin from Ireland and John from the Philippines. Apparently, we're grouping you guys together by not being on the same continent as us. Martin has come across a fair bit of discussion about Auro-3D, because you don't live in the United States where it doesn't exist. Not so much actual Auro-3D content, but rather the option of applying the Auromatic 3D Upmixer. Naturally, Wilfred Van Balen, the creator of Auro-3D, is an advocate, but so is Patrick Schnappert from Groby TV. That sounds dirty. And in addition to them, there are users who say that the Auromatic 3D Upmixer sounds better than the Dolby Surround Upmixer or DTS Neural X Upmixer. Furthermore, not all Atmos and DTS X mixes are created equal. Some sound very good as they are, but some are quite disappointing and with very little overhead activity and very little usage of objects versus channels. So for the disappointing mixes, some people advocate for using the Auromatic 3D Upmixer over direct Atmos or DTS X decoding. So before I read on, let me just tell you something about people. If it's obscure, it's better. If no one else can do it because they didn't set their speakers up in the right way, because of course they didn't, it's better. That's what people think. Okay, so let's just start with that understanding that people believe that if it is obscure or unknown, it is somehow better. That's what esoteric gear is. Esoteric gear is you've never heard of it, it's pretty, and it's expensive, so it must be better. Okay, so both Martin and John want to know. Okay, Grammarly, shut up. Both Martin and John want to know, have we been able to try Auromatic 3D Upmixer, and if so, what do we think of all this? No, and I have no intention of doing so because I don't see any Now, if I ever get to the point where we can have 6 overhead speakers, I'm going to relabel my surround backs as top rears.
Okay.
And then
or rear heights.
Or rear heights. I will elevate them somewhat. And then
so you'd be going for a 5.2.6 configuration instead of 7.2.4 or 7.2.6.
And that would probably allow me to do depending on how they end up doing the voice of God, the top middles could be a voice of God sort of situation. So then I could try it. I have no intention of configuring my theater into a true Auro 3D configuration, because what it is
surround
basically
heights and voice of God physical speakers.
So with the way that it's supposed to work is you're supposed to have ground level speakers in 5 or 7 channels around you, and then over everything but the center channel. But I don't. Maybe
you can do the center channel too. Everything but the surround backs.
Yeah, it's just a speaker that's higher, above all those
30-degree elevation angle. So you take your floor level speakers, your 5 main floor level speakers, left, center, right, and surround left and right. You take those, and then you go 30-degree elevation angle directly above those 5 speakers, another 5 speakers. And then 1 speaker straight above your head.
Right, that voice of God speaker.
That's the Auro 3, the ideal Auro 3D speaker set.
And only what, Monoprice's HTP 1 or whatever they're calling it is the only one that, or is it Trinov is the only one that can do the voice of God split into the top middles.
So both of those, but both of those are, okay. I think Storm Audio can do it too. But I mean, Trinov and Storm Audio, really expensive. So in terms of something that a middle price person might consider, the HTP 1 is really the only game in town for mono price as far as doing that. But I have been able to play around with Auro 3D a bit because I got an X6700H, and that does come with Auro 3D built into it. Okay, so let's see. There are differences between the upmixers. There are audible differences between the upmixers. I'm not going to argue that. I would even go so far as to say I quite like the Auromatic 3D Upmixer. I think it sounds pretty good upmixing content. I would not, in my situation, I would not take an actual Atmos soundtrack or an actual DTSX soundtrack, and instead of using the Atmos decoder on Atmos and the DTSX decoder on DTSX, using the Auromatic 3D Upmixer, because what that would be is, like, if it's coming from a disc, it would be playing Dolby True HD plus the Auromatic 3D Upmixer instead of actual Atmos. That's what would be going on there. So I would not do that. I would use the actual decoders for the actual content. But in terms of upmixing 5.1 or 7.1 or even stereo content, I do quite like the way the Auromatic 3D Upmixer sounds. Now, The DTS Neural X upmixer unquestionably makes the overhead speakers louder than any other upmixer so that you notice them more. And being DTS X, they tend to goose the bass a bit as well. That is quite readily apparent. I would say out of the three of them, Dolby Surround is probably the most... I want to say subtle. I'm not really sure that's the right word for it. It's... I'll go with that. It's sort of like maybe the least noticeable.
Vanilla?
Yeah, like it's the least stands out to you as being different from the original 5.1 mix. The Auromatic 3D Upmixer in general, because what it does is fairly simple. It kind of takes the sounds of the 5 or the 7 speakers and then applies a little phase shift to it and duplicates them out of the overhead speakers. That's what it does. Doesn't really do anything complicated. So it makes the whole thing sound more spacious. It does. It is noticeably, your room, or my room anyway, noticeably sounds more spacious with the Auromatic 3D Upmixer applied. So yeah, in some situations, I quite like that. So I don't poo-poo someone who says, you know what, I tried all three and the Auromatic was my favorite. I'm like, I can see that. You can hear the difference. I can see that, and it doesn't sound like the other two. Yeah, I wouldn't use it to replace actual Atmos or DTSX. Was that all the question was?
Yeah, I guess.
I think that was it.
I
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
So again, this is just people getting excited about something that sounds slightly different than things they've heard before, and
people
assuming
love
that
to
difference is
actually
better.
hear a difference. There's so many times we do stuff and we really have to work at convincing ourselves we heard a difference to justify what we did. Someone who sits down and toggles between the three upmixers and goes, oh, you know what, Auromatic sounds different and I like it. Yeah,
great.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't see any reason why I have to go and do it.
Right.
Martin has read how Dolby, DTS, and Auro all have agreed to a speaker layout that works for all three formats. Can we confirm if that's true? And if so, can we simplify how it works and how to set up all of these speakers? I don't think they have, because Auro-3D, well, DTS and I don't know that they ever agreed on anything. I think that Dolby said this is what we're doing, and everybody else said, well, I guess we're going to do it too. So is that agreement? Is that how agreement works in your world? Because Auro-3D is a different setup. Now you can kind of make it work for with the Dolby if you label things certain things and you put speakers in certain places. But DTS and Dolby overlap completely the same location. So
I mean they can.
They agreed, right? Well, like we said, we have and there's an article on gadgets about that we've talked about many times here about how to you label front heights and rear heights instead of top fronts and top rears because of how DTS
even if
decodes
physically
things.
your speakers, if you look at the diagram, you're like, physically where my speakers are lines up with labeling them top fronts and top rears. We're actually going to label them front heights and rear heights instead of tops. And that's really what it boils down to. All of them do agree, genuinely agree on the original 5 or 7 speakers in the bed layer. That's done. The original 5 or 7 floor level speakers. They all agree on that. And then what is compatible for all 3 of these formats is labeling 4 overhead speakers as front heights and rear heights, which is certainly something you can do. In any of the 11-channel AV receivers, you can label your 4 overhead speakers as front heights and rear heights. And if you do that, that configuration is compatible with all 3 of these upmixing, what would you call it? Immersive audio formats. That is compatible. Now, the physically straight overhead voice of God speaker, Auro and DTS X Pro can both use that. Dolby will not use the actual voice of God, what is technically called the top surround speaker. It will not use it. DTS X Pro, so this is a model that is beyond 11 speakers, or Auro, they can use that. And then as we've mentioned, in the lower price, lower being $4,000, the mono price HTP1 is the only one that will use top middle speakers, which can be used by both Dolby Atmos and DTS-X. They can both use top middles. That is the only one that will just play those two together in mono to mimic the voice of God speaker when you're using Auro-3D. I don't know why nobody else is doing it, but the mono price HTP1 will. So yeah, the simplified setup is your traditional 5 or 7, and then front heights, rear heights. That's really all you need to know.
Yeah. And still, it doesn't exactly line up with the Auro-3D.
No. Auro wants surround height speakers that are directly above your surround speakers, and the rear heights are not. The rear heights are directly above your surround back speakers. So that is a compromise on their part. And the weird thing with the voice of God.
Again, I wouldn't say they agreed to this.
No,
in
it's
any way,
because
shape, or form.
Atmos is so far ahead of both of these other formats that if they don't agree with something that is at least compatible with Atmos, then forget it.
So they say, somebody says, Denon and Marantz have included Auro-3D on their higher end models for a few years now, and this year Yamaha is adding it to their models. So do we think it's starting to
via a future firmware update?
Yeah. Coming soon to you from Emotiva. So do we think it's starting to catch on? Can I say no?
No, what's happened is that Wilfred Van Balen has decided that he probably shouldn't charge money for it anymore.
Since nobody's buying it.
Just to try and get it onto things. Yes, the royalty price has been dropped to, if not zero, very close to zero. That's what happened there. So he's trying to keep the format alive, and who can blame him? He invented the thing, and he wants it to succeed. I don't think it's really catching on in any big way. It's on the mono price too, as we've mentioned. So it exists.
All right, so I may not make it through this question.
I think we will. It's mostly pictures, so.
I know, but I do have a hard out. My son starts his camp again at 2:00, and it's getting close. Bertrand in Quebec, he says it's picture time. He finally feels his home theater is close enough to complete to share his results. It was a big project, starting with a storage room in the basement, which there's some pictures here of junk. Guess, and then that was completely emptied and gutted to prepare for the theater. So now we have bare walls, bare stick framing, not walls.
So this is actually like strapping on the insulation around these. This must be a basement because the concrete floor, foundation walls. So there's some insulation right up against the foundation walls and then strapping against that. So it's been gutted.
So a floating floor was installed with separate wall studs and separated ceiling joists, so very nearly a room within a room. So now we're seeing that. With
the wall studs were not built on top of the floated floor, so that is why it's not a complete room within a room. But you've got new wall studs, so these are in front of the strapping, so the drywall is not attached to the strapping. The ceiling joists are attached to the new wall frames. They're not attached to the original ceiling joist, so that's separated, and then you've got a floating floor that's within all of that.
So soundproofing was clearly a priority, with all outlets sealed with putty pads and resilient channels used to decouple the drywall from the studs. So we're seeing that, the resilient channels of these silver horizontal lines, and that's where the drywall will be attached.
Drywall gets attached to those instead of directly to the studs. Yep.
The whole room was painted flat black with black carpet. So, no one's ever going to walk in this room when you try to sell it later and go, torture chamber?
I mean, it's not quite Vanta black because you can see the reflection of the bare bulb hanging down while he was doing this off of the black walls, but that's again real close.
It's black. We made his own acoustic treatments and followed our placement guidelines, so they're on the wall.
Yeah, indeed.
And they're black.
They are.
A row of 3 theater recliners, a 77-inch OLED, dual SB1000 Pro subs, and Martin Logan Motion Series speakers all around in a 5.2.4 configuration. He's loving the results. The pictures are impossible to see. They're very black. Everything's black.
Everything in here is black.
Everything's black.
I've got to say, with what he's done, OLED was the only option because otherwise you turn the screen on and go, everything else in this room is blacker than what's coming on my screen. But looks fantastic, Bertrand. This is absolutely you go in here and you forget about the outside world. This transports you to what you're seeing on screen. That's fantastic.
So he has a question, really just a matter of curiosity. When he plays Ultra HD Blu-rays on his Panasonic UB820, he can bring up the info on the player. He can also bring up the info on his Marantz, and what has him a bit confused is that not everything matches. When he plays an HDR10 disc at the top of the info screen for his Panasonic player, it'll say 3840 by 2160 24p HDR PQ. BT 2020, YCBCR 420 10-bit. But then a bit lower down, it says 4K 24p, HDR PQ, whatever. This is so hard to read. BT 2020, YCBCR 444 12-bit.
So I'm guessing one of them is what's on the disc and the other one's what's coming out. But
that is exactly it. The top line is what is actually on the disc, and that's what the player is reading. And then the line a couple lines down, that is what the player is outputting. So it is taking the 420 on the disc. It is up converting that to YCBCR 444, which in this case, I agree with doing that because the Panasonic players do that great. And then the TV is eventually converting that to RGB. It's also just, taking the 10-bit and outputting 12-bit because I guess why not? It's just oversampling it.
If you're not having a problem with HDMI,
that's
issues,
right. Bandwidth issues.
This is fine. So when you check this Marantz, it agrees with the bottom one, which is the 4K 24, HDR10, 444, BT 2020, and 12 bits.
Yep.
So
that all makes sense.
That's good.
You're seeing what's on the disc versus what the Panasonic player is putting out, and then what's coming into the Marantz is what the Panasonic player is putting out, and what the Marantz is then passing on to the television is the exact same thing. Yeah.
All right, but when you put in the Dolby Vision disc, as Panasonic says on the top one, this is what's on the disc: 3840, 2160 by 2160, 24p, Dolby Vision 12-bit. A couple lines down, this is what it's putting out: 4K 24p. Dolby Vision 12-bit, but then this Marantz info says 4K 24, Dolby Vision, RGB, BT 2020, 8-bit. You'd just like to know what all that stuff means. In particular, why there's mismatch of the 12 versus 8-bit with Dolby Vision. What's up with that? Is it the conversion? I feel like it's the conversion to ARGB. Is that right? I don't know.
That is definitely part of it. Okay, so Dolby Vision has a whole bunch of different profiles, and I actually have to give a shout out. I forgot to look up his name, but there was somebody who commented on AVRant on our website, on avrant.com, because when I was going through my PS5 and Xbox Series X settings, I commented on this because I was looking up the data on my LG OLED when it was coming, and I was saying, oh, hey, look, it's outputting Dolby Vision in 8-bit. Well, I was wrong on that front because there is this Dolby Vision profile where what it's actually doing is it's taking the original 12-bit signal, but the 12-bit signal was... okay, so to explain this, there's regular RGB, regular red, green, blue. That's ultimately what your TV ends up showing, is red subpixels, green subpixels, and blue subpixels. But to save bandwidth, there's a conversion that goes on in the color part of the signal. They call it a color difference signal. So instead of being red, green, and blue, it has black and white, and then the difference between blue and black and white, and the difference between red and black and white, that's your CB and CR. Well, Dolby Vision uses yet another color conversion, ICTCP, which is a thing that Dolby invented. But it's a similar idea. It's a color difference signal. So on the disc is Dolby Vision in ICTCP. That gets converted to RGB. And the way that it's done in this profile is it is using 12 bits, but it's sending an 8-bit RGB signal plus 4 bits of metadata that include all the Dolby Vision added data on top of it.
Okay.
So as far as what your AV receiver sees in the signal, it's like, I'm getting an 8-bit RGB signal, and it doesn't report to you that there's 4 extra bits of Dolby Vision metadata. Well, the clue of that is that it tells you the format is Dolby Vision. Now, you would have to have this knowledge that I didn't have until this person explained it to me in the comments of AVRant. They're like, yeah, it's part of the profile where the Dolby Vision metadata is in those 4 extra bits. So when you see it's an RGB 8-bit signal plus Dolby Vision, that's your 12 bits, but it doesn't say the Dolby Vision is the 4 extra bits. So essentially that's what's going on there. And then that kind of explains a little bit about what the YCBCR versus RGB is. It's this color difference signal. The BT 2020, that's the color space.
Right.
If that were an HD signal, that would say BT 709.
Right.
BT 709 is basically, there's a triangle between red, green, and blue, and that's all the colors that it can show. BT 2020 is a bigger triangle. It can show more colors. So that's telling you that it's using the bigger triangle and is able to show you more colors. 4K and 24, that's the resolution and the frame rate, 24 frames a second. 3840 by 2160, that's 4K. I don't know why they change it in the Panasonic menus, just to confuse you, I think.
I guess so.
Yeah, and that's pretty much all of it.
So this last question, he finally got an NVIDIA Shield Pro and hooked it up. It has its fancy AI upscaling, which was turned on by default, but resulted in audio sync issues. So he turned it off, and then he noticed that the user interface, just the basic menus and navigating various apps, doesn't look nearly as sharp and clear as the menus and built-in apps on this LG OLED. Once a video is playing in 4K, it's fine, but the menus and apps don't look as clear. He checked online, and there are mentions of the NVIDIA Shield only having a 1080p output for his menus. Is this true? It's 2021. Is this supposed to be one? And this is supposed to be one of the most powerful streaming boxes. Does it honestly not have a 4K interface? Is there an easy way to fix that?
So the answers are, it is true that it is a 1080p interface. It is not a 4K interface. And he's sitting close enough to an OLED screen. He can actually see the difference in resolution. So good on you for having the eagle eyes to spot that. But yeah, it is a 1080p interface. And the easy way to fix this is to wait. Because Android, Google announced that they are going to be releasing, it's in beta right now, Android TV OS 12. Right, the 12th version of the Android TV OS, which is what the NVIDIA Shield uses, and it finally includes a 4K user interface for things that run on Android TV. Now, how quickly the NVIDIA Shield will be upgraded to Android TV 12, I don't know, because they haven't always implemented every new Android TV operating system update right away. So there might be a lag, or maybe it'll be a long time, but Android TV 12, the operating system, finally includes a 4K interface, so assuming the NVIDIA Shield gets that at some point, that's the way to get it.
All right. Well, I gotta go, so...
Okay. I think I could do Jax, because Jax is actually kind of a repeat and a refresh of something that was answered before, and it's the type of thing that you would have your eyes glaze over anyway. So, yeah, that'll probably work, and I think...
At least we're honest around here. Let's be honest. Okay. All right, guys, see you in 2 weeks.
I've been watching you all episode.
Oh, I'm not. I'm multitasking. I'm doing other things I need to do for this vacation.
When you see Tom frowning on YouTube, it's not that he's like angry at what I'm saying. It's that he's concentrating on something else on his computer screen.
Right. I'm looking at something else. All right. Have a good 2 weeks. See you guys then, and later.
All right, bye, Tom. Thanks for all of sticking in here for as long as you have, because I was expecting there would be like 1 week sometime in there that you would have been gone, and it's been over a year, so it's been quite the stretch. Bye, Tom. Okay, it is just my screen now, and I will answer Jack R's question. Jack says that he has been looking around the menus of his Marantz SR6014, and he came across Loudness Management. The heck is that? He tried toggling it on versus off, and to him, he noticed a spike in the volume. It was noticeably louder with Loudness Management turned off. So, how should Loudness Management be set? Why is it on by default? And what's it actually doing to the signals? So we have talked about Loudness Management before, but this is one of those things where it certainly doesn't hurt to repeat it, because yes, people definitely might come across it again and wonder how this should be set and what it is doing. And it doesn't ever hurt to explain it in a fresh way. So yeah, Loudness Management. Predominantly, it applies to Dolby signals. Now, I'll start with the part where it applies to both Dolby and DTS signals. This is specific to Denon and Marantz, because this is how they've set it up in their menus. But right below Loudness Management, so this is in the audio menu. So you go into the setup, you go into the audio section, and Loudness Management is one of the options. Right below Loudness Management is a setting called Dynamic Compression. And that is exactly what you would think it is. It's if you turn dynamic compression, there are, technically 5 settings. There's off, which is the default, no dynamic compression being applied. There is auto, and that we'll need to talk about with the Loudness Management setting. And then there's low, medium, and high. So if you manually set dynamic compression to low, medium, or high, that will apply to all audio signals, Dolby or DTS, and it will be dynamically compressing the dynamic range of the audio. It will be making the quietest sounds a bit louder and the loudest sounds a bit quieter, so that everything is closer together. You don't have as large a swing in volume between the quietest sound and the loudest sound. And of course, low, medium, and high determines how much of that dynamic compression is being applied. Now, Loudness management, as I said, mostly applies to Dolby signals because the auto setting for dynamic compression that I just mentioned, that only applies to Dolby signals. They do kind of explain this in the manual, like it's mentioned in the manual, but actually understanding exactly what's going on there is a bit confusing for sure. So if you turn loudness management on, then dynamic compression for Dolby signals will be set to auto. For DTS signals, it will be left at off unless you manually set dynamic compression to low, medium, or high. Setting dynamic compression manually to low, medium, or high overrides all else. Now everything is dynamically compressed at the low, medium, or high setting. But if you leave it at off, if you leave dynamic compression at off, which is the default, but you turn loudness management on, then DTS signals remain with dynamic compression off, but Dolby signals now have dynamic compression set to auto. All right, so that's the weird setting, because if you set dynamic compression to auto, then it's auto for everything, although it doesn't really apply to DTS signals, so it's a bit weird, but yeah, it gives you this thing so that you can have dynamic compression off for DTS, but auto for Dolby signals. There is a second setting that loudness management applies, which is dialogue normalization. And dialogue normalization only applies to Dolby signals. So this is why that loudness management setting pretty much only applies to Dolby signals. It just has this one weird little thing where that dynamic compression setting can be set differently for DTS versus Dolby. That's what it separates there. So mostly what we're dealing with is dialogue normalization. Dialogue normalization is a Dolby technology where the idea was, if the Dolby audio signal is authored correctly, there should be a little dial norm, a little dialogue normalization piece of metadata in the Dolby Digital or Dolby Digital Plus or Dolby True HD or Dolby Atmos audio stream. There's this little piece of metadata called dial norm for dialogue normalization. And that is supposed to tell your AV receiver that if dialogue normalization is activated, dialogue, no matter what the content is, whether it's a TV commercial versus a television show, whether it's a movie versus a television show, whatever it is, dialogue should all come out at the same average volume level. This was like Dolby's early attempt when they were starting with HD TV and all of our television broadcast signals were going to be using Dolby Digital. This was their attempt to make it so that television commercials were not crazy louder than your television program. That was predominantly what it was about. But they applied it across all types of Dolby signals to say, there's this piece of metadata where as long as dialogue normalization is active, then all dialogue will have relatively the same average volume level. Of course, there can be, differences in volume in people's voices. That's part of the signal, but there's supposed to be this averaging across all dialogue that it's relatively the same level, predominantly so that television commercials wouldn't be way, way louder than everything else. So technically speaking, dialogue normalization is supposed to be there in your Dolby signals, and having loudness management on is the way to turn dialogue normalization on. As far as the dynamic range compression, that again is a piece of metadata that's included in the stream. By and large, it's up to the people making the content whether they want any dynamic compression being applied. And so there's this little metadata flag in there that says, is there any dynamic compression intended to be applied or not? So if you're going by, I trust what the content, the Dolby audio content creators did, then you want loudness management on. And doing that shouldn't affect DTS signals whatsoever. It shouldn't affect stereo analog or stereo PCM music signals whatsoever. It shouldn't affect multi-channel PCM, if you happen to be listening to that, whatsoever. It should only affect Dolby signals. And if all of the Dolby signals you're listening to were authored correctly, you should be hearing it the way it was intended, right? So when you say you toggled it off, I don't know what type of signal you were listening to, probably a Dolby signal, and that Dolby signal was suddenly louder. Well, then the dial norm setting, that piece of metadata, had a negative number, and they usually do. They usually have a negative number associated with them. And you might even see, if you're watching the front panel display of your AV receiver and it has the full display, you might even see the dial norm setting change when you're watching a TV program and then it goes to commercial. You might see that the commercials, suddenly the dial norm is like -12 or -20 or something like that. And you go back to the TV program and it's -4. Or 0. Who knows? But the whole idea is that all of the dialogue is supposed to remain at the same average level. So I'm not sure what you were testing it with. It's certainly possible for things to get louder with dialogue normalization turned off. As I say, it's typically a negative number in that dial norm setting, so you would expect it to sound louder with it turned off. And loudness management is the way that you turn it on or off. But it bundles in this auto dynamic range compression, which again, you're relying on the people who made the Dolby signal to have set that correctly. So if you don't trust the people who are authoring the Dolby signals, then you'll turn loudness management off. In a way, this is almost like that low pass filter for the low frequency effects, the LPF for LFE setting, where I almost wish it didn't exist. Because if dialogue normalization and the auto dynamic range for Dolby signals only were just always applied and there wasn't even a setting for you to look at and change, like, you wouldn't even know. The assumption is that the people authoring the Dolby audio signals are doing it correctly and putting in the correct metadata and putting in the correct flags, and now you're hearing it the way they intended for you to hear it. So why would you turn that off? Really, the only reason you would turn it off is you've decided you don't trust them, and so you're going to try turning it off. It's one of those settings where it's like, man, you're probably going to end up doing more harm than good. That's about all I can say about it. Same with that low pass filter for the low frequency effects. Like, why you would ever change it from 120 hertz, which is the default and really the only place it should ever be set. Why you even have the ability? Well, okay, some people really, really wanted it, and it's in there in the menus, and once it's in the menus, they can't take it away or somebody's going to complain. But essentially, that's what's going on there. I hope that's clear somewhat. I hope that explains what it is. I would leave it on. I would just leave loudness management on, and I would leave the dynamic compression setting off, both of which are the defaults. So there's really nothing for you to actively do other than, if you're buying a used receiver, I guess you're going to double check that that's the setting. But I would leave it at the defaults of loudness management on. But that's what it is. That's what it's doing to the setting. It's mostly dialogue normalization, and it really only applies to Dolby signals. Okie dokie. So that is that. I will say that we have on our list Daz, who wrote in with some questions, John Q from the Philippines with some more updates from his theater, and Clint in New Zealand, who wrote in and has a pretty involved question. So those 3 questions are on the list. You will be first up for next week when I will be joined by a yet as undetermined co-host. I'm hoping Lee Overstreet can join me. It's been quite a while since we've had our favorite pinch hitter on the podcast with me. So, and I've kind of been Lucy with the football to his Charlie Brown, because for a few weeks Tom has once in a while said he might not be able to make it, so I've had Lee waiting on deck only to yank it away from him with my mixed sports metaphors, and at the last minute tell him, nope, turns out Tom can make it after all. So I'm hoping Lee can join me, but we'll see if schedules line up, and one way or another there will be an AVRant next week. So let's go back to the top here. Let's thank our listeners of the week. Clint, thank you very much for that PayPal donation. He came to avrant.com, went over to the right-hand side where it says support AVRant, and clicking on that takes you to PayPal, where you can make a donation. You don't have to have a PayPal account. You could just use a credit card if you don't want to sign up for PayPal. Thank you, Clint, for doing that. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. You say the amount, and that is automatically taken from your credit card and given mostly to us every single month automatically. So 127 patrons over there. Martin and Bertrand are 2 of our patrons, so thank you all very much for the financial support. Andrew, thank you for your generous offer to help me access Masters of the Universe Revelation on Netflix, since I no longer have my own subscription. Jack, Bertrand, and Clint, thank you all very much for giving Tom permission to use your photographs on avgadgets.com. And then Jason, Jack, Martin, Bertrand, and Clint, thank you you all for the notes of gratitude, to us for keeping the podcast going through thick and thin and schedules and pandemics and everything else that has come our way. We appreciate the notes of encouragement very much. And thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. The place to send your questions is our email address, question@avrant.com. It's wonderful that this community continues. It's wonderful that this podcast has never run out of questions to answer yet. So as long as you keep asking, we'll keep answering and we'll keep going. Question@avrant.com is the place to send it. So thank you to everybody on behalf of Tom Andrew. This has been AV Rant. I am Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.